Welcome back to my retrospective series. My name is Billy and we will be looking at Halo 3 today. Note that the video in the background will be some of my favourite moments from the game. What started off as something of a, ooh, I should replay these before I get into Halo Infinite is quickly spinning off into a, bleh, to that game. Let's just get the original trilogy done before moving on to other things. My attention span is not quite there for some of the games after this one. Well, apart from maybe ODST and maybe Reach. But before we get to the stripped down jazzy non-super soldier, we need to cover what is maybe the polar opposite, Halo 3. This game is going to be the touchstone for many, certainly the one that I remember outstripping all sense of normal popularity of games at the time. Practically everyone at my high school was playing this in the evening on Xbox Live. Now, I was the weirdo who preferred single player, but I certainly played the game. When I spoke about Halo 2, I did it from the perspective of how it is interesting to follow up such a successful first game. If Halo 1 was a simple, unburdened shooter with great mechanics, Halo 2 brought a level of capital S story to the series, while Halo 3 is a synthesis of these. It brings a surprising level of polish, the combat feels good as ever, but with more thoughtful, interesting backdrops, an increased level of aliveness to the general levels, and an amount of bombast either not possible or not required in the older games. It's proof that as studios build skills, they are able to produce better quality games as time goes on. Halo 3 for me is where Bungie really cemented themselves. Although I know that they had a long history before this, it certainly is the culmination to one of the leaders of mainstream games today. It, as the rest of the series, has been fascinating to play in 2022. When discussing Halo 2, one of the places that I found significant differences were the weapons. Halo 3 chooses only to introduce 2 more weapons, instead of the Cavalcade in 2. The Gravity Hammer and the Spartan Laser, the first signal that we're in Tightening Up mode, Perfecting mode, instead of All Out Edition. These add new close quarters weapons, basically giving you the main weapon of Halo 2's last boss, which I certainly think is on purpose. You know, nodding to that you can have one yourself, as well as another decent long-ranged, heavy damaging weapon with the Spartan Laser. The other main addition to the weapons are more in-world support weapons. Games of this era love to have a turret or a mounted weapon that you can rip off its hinges, proving the power of the player character to everyone. You see, only they could provide enough support to these heavy recoil weapons without them being on their stands. They don't need those silly supports. This over-the-top display of exaggerated power is fun in retrospect, but I do remember it happening a lot in games of this era. GDC must have had an earnest 40-minute presentation on why shooters must include this, apparently an inspiration to everyone. We also have a new grenade, a Molotov cocktail type, and deployable tactical gear. The deployable tactical gear is where I think the game is significantly expanding, bringing a range of new items that you can use in the midst of battle. But I only really used it about 3-4 times in the campaign, and the Molotov cocktail I only used when I spammed all my grenades and had nothing else to throw. This is all a nod to say that I actually played through this game on normal this time, and that difficulty did not require me to use my arsenal to my highest ability. By the way, the reason I picked normal is because I forgot that I was playing the series on heroic and just decided to carry on when I realised that these enemies were dying a lot quicker than expected. And I think it says a lot about Halo that I still had a really good time with this. There was just enough resistance to put something to pursue, but was also pretty streamlined as an experience. Another thing I can see is the start of additions to the argument for Halo as an open world game here. Halo 1 had the Silent Cartographer mission. It's part of this debate. A more open space to explore with relatively open-ended objectives, all of which are very fondly remembered today. Halo 3 brings to bat several instances that make its own particular argument, but nothing as grand and central as the Silent Cartographer, instead smaller things. These come as instances like defended checkpoints on the map that you come across, or people already engaged in combat ahead of you, streams of vehicles coming at you. They all give a sense that the world is operating without you there. Secretly, this is a part of what make open worlds tick, even if it is all smoke and mirrors in this game. The propellant for the engine that we are describing up to this stage is bombast. Every Halo game has to have that mission where you're escaping from something exploding in a warthog, and this game has it. I mean, the series has kind of always been running on bombast, but we're at a full tank at this stage. The intricately designed skyboxes are here to stay, and underneath there we are fighting expansive and grand battles. Remember, one of the largest enemies you have to fight in Halo 2 is the Scarab. Halo 3 must take out about 10 of them at least, sometimes even 2 at a time. More enemies and bigger battles? Check. Cocky one-liners? Check. Grand assaults and last stand? Check. Halo 3 has the largest and most developed set pieces of the series. If this era of games is remembered for much, one of the key components is going to be set piece design. They serve as location to centralised development. A lot of time goes into them as they tend to be the most memorable thing of these types of games. They fully use the graphics and design available at the time to create these grand backdrops for you to play under, with fresh mechanics or narrative pressures to push you forward. There is often something collapsing around you, just at the right pace for you to escape last minute. Just enough swelling music to get the sense of danger, but often without it. This is the era that one of the main critiques of games that I remember was them being roller coasters. Now all of this is true, but when they work, they work. Especially when they aren't a part of every game that exists today. More of a field that games can choose to be a part of instead of a prerequisite. And I cannot say this enough, it also just really helps that the actions that you're doing underneath these set pieces is just really good. Halo 3 changes settings, enemy combinations and weapon availability at such a smart pace that it allows it to emulsify together into a cohesive whole. This is incredibly smooth and interesting, holding up throughout. Yes, I've been watching cookery videos again. The Flood have also been expanded to be more interesting. There are now more types of them, as well as an evolutionary path that they can take through different forms. The Covenant remains pretty much the same through the game, but the game is constantly interested in serving you up these different formations that require their own tactical considerations. And the turrets and deployables add a whiff of difference to any of the things that the game can offer you as well. So the gameplay, playing the game, every part of the moment-to-moment experiences are really good. But I'm going to go away from high praise and actually focus for a moment on one of the aspects that I think is weaker. The story. Halo up to this point has been an integration of 2 types of story. The war story and the sci-fi story. The war story usually takes front and centre, with you embodying someone called the Master Chief. Named after an overwrought military station that I always assumed was fake and just a way of elevating your player character, but a quick Google confirms that it's actually a real military position. It has all the beats that you expect from a particular type of war story, going against all the odds, needing to achieve a grand impossible goal. With the one-liners again, strict leaders and banter pervade all throughout. You're meant to feel close to the characters because of some form of trauma bonding through these mad experiences that you go through. But I tend to feel like you just get close to them because they are the characters that you end up seeing. You see, there isn't much emotional resonance with this game's version of this type of story. In the end, the military story can feel a little rote, a little nothing. But more interesting, the sci-fi that powers the stakes of the game has actually usually been quite good, if not always the most well-developed thing that exists. The power struggle that erupts in Halo 2 in the Covenant is excellent and just such an interesting beat. The Halos themselves and what they do, and the Flood being there to raise the stakes, are all decent parts that are complicated as the story goes on. Things like the Gravemind comes in to tell you what the Flood want and who they are. You have direct conversations with the prophets of the Covenant. All of the sci-fi aspects are interesting in their own right. It's where these two combine that it just doesn't quite work for me, the military and the sci-fi. Chest-beating, uncritical military stories like this revel in their own projected and fictionalised power. They are a power fantasy unto themselves. And that's not to say they can't be interesting, it's just this one isn't. It stands out to such a high degree against the sci-fi backdrop that they have a sense of being 2 different stories altogether. There's this intricate sci-fi world happening, and Master Chief is just happening to it. We also get these obvious plot beats that go through this game. The several deaths of key characters through this have the sense of treading the path well worn for the sake of it. They attempt to raise the emotional stakes, they attempt to make you feel something, but it just takes something much greater to evoke this. And that's because none of these characters are given a chance to breathe in themselves, really. The only things that distinguish them as being anything that's slightly special is they just happen to be there around you. They do have certain actions that are elevated compared to just a normal grunt, but I think it says a lot that one of the major characters that follows around and that got named from the first game wasn't named. He was just a grunt. And these characters don't get to distinguish themselves because they are next to the Master Chief, who's this all-powerful person. How could they be special when Master Chief is the one who has to be special? There is one other relationship that has a chance to develop in this game, and that's the one between Cortana and the Master Chief. but it ends up being laughable. There is a sense of weight being given to this relationship that is just 99% plinky plonky piano playing over Cortana giving these monologues. It becomes one-sided because they're just all monologues. There is no back and forth in this game. And even if I go back to the back and forth that's in the previous games, it's light banter at most. The relationship that's happening in this game between these two characters isn't the one that was developed previous to this. It's different, it's changed, it's elevated. Now these have been pretty harsh words, I know. The main beats are fine, the sense of scale that they bring to the conflict is welcome. It's just a lot of the characters that exist within this tend to be clunky. I often heard in the past an argument for the complete removal of stories within games. The thing that games do best is mechanics. They're one of the few mediums that can access this aspect with ease. And I sort of get it. Going back to some of these older games, you can see the story is almost completely supplementary. I'm not sure if you would have a worse time in Halo 3 if you just skipped every single cutscene and played the game. After all, what this game is famous for is its multiplayer. That's one of the main reasons people played it. But it does raise the stakes. Even though we are doing the typical world-ending cataclysmic destruction of everything, the stakes are raised. It does elevate what you're doing somewhat. Trying to bring everything that I've said together into a conclusion is difficult. I feel like I've been much more critical of this game than the previous ones. I think that has something to do with being the finale. There's a lot more scope for forgiveness when it's early games in the series. They're just trying things out, seeing how it works and seeing how they get on with it. This game should in reality be the culmination of everything that is learned. And on a mechanic side, it really is. It brings together the aspects that were so good about Halo 1 and 2. The gameplay, the shooting, the combat is intense, diving in and out of cover and trying to get the upper hand with a different set of weaponry each time. But it never quite learnt from the story. I sort of presented this as having the military story and the sci-fi story, the two components, and they never quite mesh well. It feels like it ends up cribbing from other media than doing anything wholly unique itself. But even that framework is a bloody brilliant way to engage with the mechanics of combat. And it's funny if you think about it. That's the story of Bungie. You think of Destiny and its grimoire cards, some of the best storytelling in games hidden away. But the reason people played Destiny wasn't that story. Well, most people, that is. People played it for the shooting. The shooting was excellent. Something that clearly started with Halo. The story of Halo and the story of Bungie are so intertwined at this point. It has the same highs and the same lows that they are going to go on to create again and again. I think Halo remains a must-play series from some perspectives, especially if you have any interest in trying to create shooters. But as playing older games sometimes happens, they don't always hold together perfectly well. That being said, ODST is meant to be a masterpiece from certain directions, so I look forward to playing that. Thank you for joining me for this Halo 3 retrospective. My name's been Billy. Goodbye.